Kinder, gedenkst Heiere, was zu lehren dort. Sagst noch einmal und sage noch einmal, kommen alle vor. Sagst noch einmal und sage noch einmal, kommen alle vor. Lehrend Kinder mit großen Fähigkeiten, also sag ich euch an. Wer wird Kirche von euch kennen, Ivri, der bekommt davon. Wer wird Kirche von euch kennen, Ivri, der bekommt davon. Lernt Kinder, hort mit Teure, jeder und ist schwer. Lebt auf der, was hat gelernt Teure, sie darf der Mensch noch mehr. Lebt auf der, was hat gelernt Teure, sie darf der Mensch noch mehr. Ihr werdet Kinder älter werden, mit ihr allein verstehen, wie voll in die Oasis liegen Scheren und wie viel Gewinn. Wie voll in die Oasis liegen Scheren und wie viel Gewinn. Als ihr werdet Kinder den Bollisch schleppen, euch gemutet sein. Sollt ihr von die Oasis kommen schleppen, guckt ihn sehr allein.
But they also have these very imaginative curses. You know, it's much harder. You know, all these curses in Yiddish, which are actually funny and clever, as opposed to just calling somebody an SOB. You come up with something much more colorful. But I never knew this language. I only learned it later on because we didn't. My parents and their circle did not use it. They had strong opinions. There were people they really didn't like. There were people they had very derogatory opinions about, but they expressed it all in full language. They did not use all these curse words. And ironically,
While the Jews imported their radical socialist ideals to Montreal, the politics and culture of Montreal shaped the contours of their Yiddishkeit too. The immigrant Jews' way of life offended the Catholic Francophone sensibility and was wildly distinct from the Protestant Anglophone culture. The Jews were of third solitude. Granted privileges but not rights under the Provincial Education Act of 1903, Jews could attend Protestant schools but were denied seats on the school board due to its Christian character. Parents chafed at having taxation without representation and petitioned the board to hire Jewish teachers and allow Jewish commissioners. The Protestant board insisted that Jewish property owners provided insufficient funding for their students, despite protestations that Jewish ratepayers were often incorrectly listed as Protestants or Catholics. A frustrated board in 1922 sought a neutral panel to address this perceived financial burden, and later threatened to expel Jews from the Protestant system. For part of the Jewish community, the Jewish school question served as further proof of the need for a separate school system, but this issue only deepened rifts in a community already divided by labor strikes and the quote-unquote kosher meat wars. Established uptowners regarded separate schools as a threat to integration. In contrast, immigrant downtowners, the population we're mostly dealing with in this documentary, had the support of the Canadian Jewish Chronicle and the Yiddish Canada Adler newspapers. Quebec Premier Louis-Alexandre Taschereau sought to address these tensions in 1924 with the Committee of Nine, a royal commission composed of Protestant, Catholic, and Jewish members. The commission's effectiveness was undermined by protests from downtowners who disagreed with the 3 Jewish commission members selected. These included 2 uptowners who were committed to preserving the status quo, and only 1 downtowner who supported separate Jewish schools. The case eventually reached the Judicial Committee of the Privy Council in London, which in 1928 stated that Jews in fact had no legal rights in the Quebec public school system due to the BNA Act, but that Quebec could create a separate Jewish panel. Allied with an increasingly anti-Semitic press, which viewed a Jewish school board as subversive. Taschereau, too, grew less supportive. Meanwhile, the Jewish board's positions were filled with uptowners who again tried to negotiate a deal with the Protestants. Without consulting the rest of the community, the board managed to secure legal tolerance, as opposed to privilege, for Jewish students to attend Protestant schools, but nothing more. Hiring discrimination persisted, as did the lack of tolerance for Jewish holidays, and Jewish students were still forced to learn Christian religious teachings. While the situation would slowly improve, the Jewish community had to wait until the 1960s for the government to finally fund Jewish day schools. Within this environment, how did the PERETZ SHUL and the Volksschule, the 2 Jewish day schools, come to be? Why were there 2 of them? What was the deal? I was looking at this painting, Angelus Novus, or The Angel of History, by Paul Klee, while pondering all this. And you won't believe what happened. I was visited by the Angel of History itself, who took it upon himself to explain the story.
Here I am, the one you've heard of, the one you've felt the presence of, without knowing what it all means. The Angel of History. My eyes are fixed. My mouth is open. My wings outspread. My face is forever turned towards the past. As my first owner, Walter Benjamin, wrote about me, while mere mortals perceive history as a chain of events, I see one single catastrophe which keeps piling wreckage and hurls it in front of my feet. I would like to stay, awaken the day, and make whole what has been smashed. But a storm is blowing in from paradise. It has got caught in my wings with such force that I can no longer close them. The storm irresistibly propels me into the future. The storm called progress. But my face is forever turned toward the past. So, you want to know how these Jewish day schools, the Volksschule and the PERETZ SHUL, came to be in Montreal? What was the whole deal? Why 2 separate schools? Two years after the National Radical School was founded, a Jewish school which emphasized values of social justice and Yiddish language and literature, a group of teachers split off to form the Yiddish Volksschule, due to disagreements over the relative importance of Yiddish and Hebrew in Jewish education. The Volksschule wanted Hebrew, and if I'm being honest with you, it was because of this feeling that Yiddish was the language of the shtetl and the enemy of the dream of assimilation. The radical school was renamed the I.L. PERETZ Schule, named for the iconic Yiddish writer, in 1913. The principal of the PERETZ Schule was Yaakov Zipper, and the principal of the Volksschule was Shloime Weizmann. These two men sparred in the arena of ideology, and some would say they just couldn't stand each other on a personal level. As kids say nowadays, they definitely did not vibe. Yaakov Zipper made it his mission to send impoverished students, as well as Jewish refugees, to his school. He saw hypocrisy in the move to a more culturally assimilatory Hebraist style of education. In 1950, he wrote in his journal, "The secularists have lost their power and the common people don't know what they want. They want a bar mitzvah, but really desire the banquet that follows. Strive to join a synagogue, but are intent on mere belonging. Yiddish and Eastern European life no longer have many supporters." By the 1950s, in the Volksschule, when Yiddish is mentioned in promotional material, it's in connection to Hebrew and usually secondary. The same Volksschule report card stated on the cover that it's the aim of the school to help children become good Jewish Canadian citizens. Biculturalism was the main tension of Weizmann's pedagogical approach. How can one be loyal to Judaism and to Canada? As the community continued to assimilate, secular Jewish education as a whole was at risk. Zipper had little respect for what he saw as Weizmann's lack of passion. Now, this is just one Angel of History's version of events. You can take it as you will. The wind is picking up. There goes the past. I've got to get going. Best of luck to you with the documentary, Gabriel.
Bye. Hi Oda, how are you?
I'm good. How are you today?
Good. We're in this beautiful terrace overlooking this cliff. We're here today to talk about your father, Yaakov Zipper, who was an enormously influential figure within Yiddishkeit in Montreal and the education of so many, pupils who maybe didn't have the most opportunities as well, poorer students and refugees. So, when you think of your father, what values did you feel he emphasized in your upbringing?
Well, when you're growing up, you don't, there isn't like 10 commandments of values.
Right.
He doesn't say, be good. Things like that. But there was one rule in our house, and that was we had to speak Yiddish. Well, Yiddish was my mother tongue anyway, of course, when I was younger, but once I went out on the street or whatever, I don't remember learning English.
Wow.
But if the next thing that I found, only learning and thinking about it afterwards, was the what he felt towards his family. Before the war, he just felt that the anti-Semitism in Poland was just horrible, and so he started bringing his brothers. He had 3 brothers and 2 sisters, and an old and religious father with a long beard.
Yes.
That they had all pulled away from him. They kind of left him. He was heartbroken, but that was it. They all became secular and political, some communists, there were many shades there.
Okay.
So the next thing was, and because even when I was younger, we had a fairly big, roomy house on Esplanade, which is Esplanade, and Fairmont. Like Esplanade and Fairmont, it was right near where the big synagogue was. And every time somebody from Europe came, they stayed with us in our double parlor. Then, when I was younger and we lived on Esplanade, I remember Christmas time, he used to take me to Outremont Park, where all the Christmas trees were lit up. And, he told me, what it was, and he wasn't keeping away, where we were living.
Yes.
Yeah, and there he, explained many things to me.
Wow.
Jesus and the stories and the Bible and the New Testament. So, so that was another value that I wasn't
grounded in where he was.
Yes,
where
that's
you
right.
all were.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So even though it was Yiddish in the house, I mean, he was not, saying close your eyes to where you are and who you are.
Yeah.
And then the next thing he did, well, education was the most important thing, so he sent me to the new day school, which was the Jewish People's Schools.
Okay.
Now that was, he was principal of the PERETZ
That's
school,
right.
but they didn't have a day school yet.
Right.
So he chose to send me there, and after that, he was somebody who loved music and nigunim, so he was always singing. People coming around at night and sitting and singing Yiddish folk songs.
Wow.
And that went on afterwards in the same way. When we used to go to the country, we had already moved from Esplanade down to Clark Street, which wasn't the greatest street, but it was above Montreal, so it wasn't bad.
I see.
Because it was close to the Duluth PERETZ.
Yes, yes. So
the one on 112.
Yeah.
So we moved. And I taught there.
Okay.
And that was later on. I taught in the Jewish schools. So these were things that he sort of lived with, and I guess imbibed them from him.
Just so the people at home can hear about it, you gave me a copy of the journals of your father that you had translated into English, and you wrote in an inscription about a nigun.
Yes.
And I was wondering, and just today you showed me sort of where it comes from, this tale about the Baal Shem Tov. And I was wondering if you could just say what the phrase is in Yiddish. And we can explain what it is. Yeah.
All right. Now the phrase is "Singtje dem Liegen weiter," and it comes from, I don't know which Hebrew book that comes from or where the origin is, but I found it in my father's book that he wrote of the biography of the Baal Shem Tov. That was his first book. It was called Gewen is a Mensch. There once was a man.
Yeah.
Somebody special.
Yes.
And in that book, at the front of it, is this little paragraph about the Baal Shem Tov saying, that the nigun is what, keeps us living, and you have to continue.
And it never stops and it never starts.
That's right. It comes back to itself all the. Well, the values were what he called, or what people call hemshech, that you have to continue what you have and not lose it. And the city had, it had classes. It had groups who were wealthy and wanted all of us who came from a shtetl to assimilate as fast as we could. And so he was definitely against that, and he did choose, to be somewhere where the poor people had come, and so his
to sing the nigun,
to
keep the nigun.
Here's the irony. So to keep on keeping Yiddish as a value and as a language to be taught, not just as a language to speak when you didn't want to, you had to be very, very strong. And this is an immigrant story also that continues and that I use to this day when you look at certain of the stereotypes there are about immigrants generally. You'll hear in a kind of disparaging way, les gens qui, ils parlent la langue à la maison, like it's something detrimental to their children, when in fact it's very healthy for kids to know their origins and where they are. So I have no memory of this, but my mother told the story that when we came to kindergarten, first day second day of school, who knows? The then kindergarten teacher, Miss Wyman, says to my mother, so how old is my mother then? She's 28 years old. I'm 5, so she's 28. Young woman, been through, says to my mother, it might not be such a good idea to speak to your daughter in Yiddish. You should speak to her in English. So, because if you speak to her in Yiddish, you'll spoil her accent. So my mother said, why? She said, you'll spoil her accent. So my mother, you have to be strong,
Right.
because she said, well, what accent exactly do you think I'm going to give her if I speak to her in English? I'm just learning it myself. She said, I will speak to her. I believe in communication. I will speak to her in Yiddish, and I have every confidence that she'll learn English very well in school. But other people were intimidated.
That's right.
And many people were intimidated by their neighbors, so they spoke Yiddish. So Yiddish became...
Steht und tracht, a ganze Nacht. Weinen zu lernen und nicht verschämen. Weinen zu lernen und nicht verschämen. Tumbala, 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 laika. Tumbala, 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 laika. Tumbala, laika. Shibala, laika. Wachsen und mögen, was kann brennen und nicht aufhören, was kann wecken,